the loudest legal news of the day, obviously, was the surrender heard around the world. Rupert Murdoch surrendered today. Rupert Murdoch surrendered like you have never seen him surrender before. Rupert Murdoch decided to give up. And we know it had to be Rupert Murdoch's decision because no one else is empowered to make any real decisions about how the Fox propaganda channel does business, including how the channel decides to handle lies on television. Only Rupert Murdoch could have made the decision today to stop trying to defend his network's coverage of the last presidential elections and the Dominion voting machines used in that election. Rupert Murdoch woke up today so deeply terrified of what was going to happen in court today that he decided he had to stop it before the jury heard a word. He had to stop it before a Dominion lawyer said a single word in that courtroom. This morning, Judge Eric Davis gave the jury some brief preliminary instructions about taking notes during the trial and not consuming any news reports about the trial and a few other standard items of instruction for the jury before the case got underway, including the promise from the judge that that jury would get out of work every day at 4:30 p.m. They got out a little earlier than that today when Rupert Murdoch decided to pay Dominion Voting Systems $787.5 million to settle the case, to stop the case. The settlement discussions began when the judge recessed for lunch today, telling everyone to be back in the courtroom at 1:30 p.m. When 1:30 p.m. arrived, no one came back to the courtroom because the lawyers had passed the word to the judge that they were working on a settlement. And that can happen at any point in a civil trial, so the judge certainly wasn't surprised by that. And it is standard to simply suspend while the lawyers are working on a settlement. The settlement Rupert Murdoch paid for today could have been purchased at that price before Dominion ever put Rupert Murdoch under oath in a deposition in which Rupert Murdoch highly incriminated himself as a functioning co-conspirator in the defamation of the Dominion voting systems. If Rupert Murdoch had been smart about this case, if he had been half smart about this case, which he wasn't, he could have settled this case before Tucker Carlson was forced to go under oath in a deposition and forced to hand over all of his text messages and emails to lawyers about how intensely and passionately he hates Donald Trump. If Rupert Murdoch hadn't completely botched the legal strategy in this case, he could have purchased a settlement with Dominion without Dominion ever reading a single text messages of anyone who worked at Fox or ever giving up a single word under oath testimony from anyone at Fox. That never had to happen. But Rupert Murdoch and the Fox lawyers conducted the single worst defense of a defamation case that this country has ever seen. The reality of how powerful a case is against Fox finally landed on the 92-year-old slow-reacting Rupert Murdoch this morning, just this morning. And then he did everything he possibly could to make sure that no one ever heard the opening statement against Fox that Stephen Shackelford was going to give today at 1:30 p.m. as the very first words heard when the trial got underway.
As I was preparing today to give the opening that I never got to give, I was reminded of the hell that the Dominion employees went through and continue to go through to this day. Money is accountability, and we got that today from Fox. But we're not done yet.
Dominion is not done yet. Dominion still has defamation cases against the MyPillow guy, Rudy Giuliani, Trump lawyer Sidney Powell, Newsmax, and OAN. If the evidence against them in those cases is as strong as the evidence against Fox, then they too will be crushed by Dominion legally and forced to pay judgments or settlements that will probably bankrupt them. Stephen Shackelford is right. Money is accountability. That is how the civil justice system works. In that system, and in that system alone, money is accountability. That is how lawsuits work. Lawsuits are about money. The outcome of a lawsuit is not expressed with words like guilty or not guilty. Those words never enter a lawsuit. It is expressed in amounts of money. And a settlement like this one is the equivalent of a guilty plea in a criminal case. Fox knew from the top down, Fox knew. That is what Dominion said in a brief filed in the case. And Dominion proved that. They proved that in their case. And they proved to the judge in the case that what Fox said about Dominion and allowed to be said about Dominion was false. The judge accepted as undisputed fact that Fox was providing a forum for Rudy Giuliani and other Trump supporters to lie to Fox viewers about Dominion voting machines. Dominion got Rupert Murdoch to admit under oath that he could have stopped the lying, but he chose not to. That was a choice he made. Dominion has proved that Tucker Carlson was lying to his audience about how he felt about Donald Trump. Dominion proved all of that before going to trial. And that is the way it usually works in civil cases, because each side in a lawsuit gets the right to subpoena witnesses and force them to testify under oath before the trial. And the trial is usually just a rerun of what happened in the depositions, what was said in the depositions, and what was revealed in the documents obtained by subpoena in the pretrial discovery process. Dominion has been able to make public all of that material already. And so in a trial, we were likely to learn nothing new that we did not already know. And that is common in civil trials. Rupert Murdoch and the Fox lawyers' strategy was so harmful to Fox because it forced the revelation of all of that material before trial, because Dominion was allowed to make that material public in response to hopeless defense filings filed in court by Rupert Murdoch's lawyers, who were outsmarted every day of this case by the Dominion lawyers. Rupert Murdoch lost today, and he lost in this case long before today, as soon as he took it far enough to enable Dominion to subpoena Rupert Murdoch. A smart person running that company never would have allowed that to happen. If Rupert Murdoch were a smarter businessman, he never would have allowed himself to be subpoenaed in this case. And today's settlement shows he didn't have to allow that to happen. We now know that Rupert Murdoch was sitting there the whole time with $787.5 million in his pocket, ready to hand over to Dominion. And Rupert Murdoch foolishly, stupidly decided to do that at the worst possible moment. He did it after Dominion's lawyers were able to reveal everything to the public. Dominion's lawyers discovered the truth through the subpoena power that the lawsuit granted to them, and Rupert Murdoch could have stopped that subpoena power in the first week by doing what he did today. But Rupert Murdoch wasn't smart enough to do that. And so we now luckily know, thanks to Dominion's smart lawyering and Rupert Murdoch's very stupid lawyering, we now know that Fox knew, from the top down, Fox knew. We have the proof. We have the text messages. We have the emails. We have the under oath testimony from all of them. We had that already. We didn't need the trial for that. And for the first time today, at one of the lower viewership hours on the network, a Fox audience was allowed to hear about the Dominion lawsuit for the very first time from Fox's so-called media reporter, Howard Kurtz.
This had to do with the idea that Dominion voting machines, and former President Trump and his allies made this case on Fox and elsewhere, were somehow stealing votes from Donald Trump and flipping them to Joe Biden. That's obviously false. Those were conspiracy theories. But the case would have revolved around, whether Fox had done due diligence, whether it was reckless, whether it was simply reporting, as the network contends, on an extremely newsworthy matter argued by the former or then President of the United States himself.
That's obviously false. Those were conspiracy theories. Boy, that sounded really easy to say, especially at high speed like that. But no one at Fox had the brains or the courage to say that about the lies that Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani were telling about Dominion voting systems. That's obviously false. Those were conspiracy theories. That's what we were saying on this network every night. But no one at Fox, until today, was allowed by Rupert Murdoch to say that's obviously false. It took a nearly 2-year lawsuit to force someone at Fox to say that's obviously false about something that was obviously false. Think about the stupidity it took for Rupert Murdoch to get that company into that position, the stupidity of the way Rupert Murdoch managed this situation with Dominion while it was happening is a unique level of stupidity among corporate executives and executives involved in any way with any form of the news business. Fox could have invited Rudy Giuliani on every show to say anything he wanted to and never been sued by Dominion if the Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity types had not in any way endorsed what Rudy Giuliani said. If they had just ended the interviews with lines like, well, if that's true, that's really bad, they could not have been sued. That's how easy it was to never be sued and push the Rudy Giuliani and Trump story very hard. But Rupert Murdoch and the people he pays to speak for him on television never for a second allowed their audiences to suspect that Rudy Giuliani just might be a pathological liar who's lying about Dominion voting systems. It was so easy, so easy for Rupert Murdoch to keep pushing the Trump lies and have his network push the Trump lies without ever being sued. And Rupert Murdoch was too stupid to find the way to do that and guide the people he pays into the safe zone of managing their legal risk, which is incredibly easy to do in situations like this. Civil lawsuits never send anyone to jail. Civil lawsuits are settled with money. Sometimes it's an amount of money that hurts to have to pay, and sometimes it's an amount of money that does not hurt to have to pay. But civil lawsuits don't lead to the kind of dramatic, emotionally rewarding outcomes that can happen at the sound of the words guilty or not guilty, dramatically delivered by a jury in a criminal case, which is one of the reasons all of the lawyer shows you have been watching on television since lawyer shows were invented are about criminal cases and not civil cases. Perry Mason never had a single civil case. So if you're at home tonight thinking you'd be so much happier if Rupert Murdoch had been dragged in to testify under oath in a Delaware courtroom, please understand that there would be no cameras in that courtroom. There would be no audio recordings of Rupert Murdoch's voice under oath in the courtroom. And his testimony would read, basically, when we finally got our hands on it in a trial transcript, pretty much identical to what it already says in the deposition transcript that we already have. And so your imagined level of satisfaction in forcing the manager of this whole falsehood pushed about Dominion on Fox, Rupert Murdoch, forcing him to testify about everything that Fox did it's an exaggerated sense, I think, of what was possible in that courtroom, because it was not likely to be any more revealing than what's already revealed in reading the deposition transcript of Rupert Murdoch that exists, thanks to the brilliance of the Dominion lawyers who beat Rupert Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch's lawyers every step of the way, strategically and legally, and forced them today into complete and utter surrender. The truth won today. Very big day for the truth. The truth won big. You don't get these days very often. The truth won big, and Rupert Murdoch lost. Rupert Murdoch lost big. Rupert Murdoch stupidly cornered himself and his company and the people who work for him into this surrender that they all participated in today. The other, and indeed long-term, much more important legal news of the day could be what we will be discussing in a moment. It is a filing in court today in Fulton County, Georgia, by District Attorney Fani Willis, asking a judge to prevent one of the defense lawyers for some of the fake electors, fake Trump electors in Georgia, from continuing to represent those clients, because the district attorney says those clients were never told by that lawyer that they were offered immunity by the district attorney. This is a very, very serious form of malpractice by a criminal defense lawyer, if true. And the filing indicates that District Attorney Fani Willis's office has already had some form of conversation with some of those fake electors, in which some of those clients of that lawyer implicate other clients of that lawyer once they actually are allowed a chance by the district attorney to tell at least some of what they know about the case. Now, this could indicate that some of the fake electors, all of whom were told months ago that they are targets of the criminal investigation, that some of them might be cooperating tonight with that criminal investigation of Donald Trump.